My name's Mike Thompson, and I'm a single dad doing my best to raise my son, Brian. He's been in a wheelchair since he was born, thanks to a rare genetic disorder that messes with his muscles. It's painful for him, especially when the temperature drops quickly. Cold weather hits him hard. Not too long ago, we moved into a neighborhood run by a pretty strict homeowners association. At first, I figured the rules were just there to keep things tidy. You know, make the place nice for everyone. But I had no idea how obsessive they could get. I spent over 20 years serving overseas. I've seen war zones, real suffering. But I never thought I'd be facing a different kind of fight, right here in my own backyard. It was one of those brutal January nights. Freezing cold, snow pounding the windows. The wind chill had dropped below zero. I wasn't too concerned at first. We had supplies, and the forecast said things might ease up by morning. Brian was in the living room, tucked under a big, heavy blanket, watching TV. Then, out of nowhere, his breathing turned shallow. His lips went pale, almost bluish. His eyes kept fluttering like he was about to pass out. My heart nearly stopped. I rushed to check his oxygen levels, way too low. Panic tried to set in, but I pushed it down and called 911 right away. I told the dispatcher my son needed help, fast. They said an ambulance was on its way. I stepped out on the porch to watch for the flashing lights, hoping they'd break through the thick snow soon. Not long after, I heard the siren in the distance. It was getting closer, then suddenly it just stopped. I didn't know what was going on, but I wasn't waiting around to find out. I threw on a heavy coat and ran out into the snow. What I saw made no sense. The ambulance was there, all right, engine running, lights flashing red in the snow. But it couldn't move. It was blocked by an SUV that had been parked sideways across the narrow street. And in front of it stood a woman in a puffy winter coat and fancy boots, arms folded tight across her chest. Her face? Pure attitude. You'd think the paramedics had insulted her personally. One of them leaned out of the window, yelling that they had a medical emergency. I heard something about a kid in critical condition. That kid was mine. I ran over, adrenaline surging, snow stinging my face. That ambulance is for my son. I shouted, my voice tight and sharp. I'd never seen this woman before, but I could tell right away who she had to be, Debbie. She was the HOA president, and a couple neighbors had already warned me about her. I'd brushed it off as gossip, until that moment. She was holding up a piece of paper, some kind of HOA map or rulebook, and saying the ambulance wasn't allowed to drive down the road without permission. She claimed it would mess up the freshly plowed cul-de-sac, which apparently violated some HOA policy. Rules are rules, she told me, like that was supposed to justify it. Now, my military training had taught me how to stay cool under pressure, but it also taught me when to act. I tried to explain, calmly, that my son was disabled and barely conscious. He needed help, right now. But she just kept repeating her HOA nonsense. You should have filed a request if you planned on bringing a large vehicle onto a private road, she said, in the most patronizing tone I've ever heard. I looked over at the paramedics. They were just as stunned as I was. One tried to maneuver around the SUV, but the snowbanks were too high. If they got stuck, we'd lose even more time. Debbie refused to move. Said it was too much of a hassle. I could barely believe it. A kid's life was on the line, and she was worried about snow and tire marks. One of the medics started calling the cops. I didn't correct him when he assumed I was just a concerned neighbor. Didn't matter right then. Go ahead and call, I told him. We're running out of time. Snow kept swirling and the wind got worse. I told the paramedics to follow me on foot. We had no other choice. We started moving fast, pushing through snowdrifts while Debbie yelled behind us about fines and citations like we were criminals. That 100-yard dash back to my front door? It felt like a mile. My boots crunched through ice. I could barely breathe. The paramedics were doing their best, lugging their gear right behind me. When we got inside, Brian looked awful, barely responsive. They checked his vitals. Everything was tanking. His body couldn't handle the cold anymore, and he kept slipping in and out. They had some emergency gear in their kits and gotten 4 into him. One of the medics looked at me, and I'll never forget his face. He was scared, and that scared me even more. Just then my phone buzzed. A neighbor told me the police had arrived. But Debbie wasn't backing down. She was still out there, spouting HOA rules like they were sacred law. She said she had the final say on what vehicles could enter during bad weather. I always knew HOAs had weird rules, but this was something else. This wasn't just overreach, it was dangerous. It was negligence that could have killed my son. I wanted to go back out there and give her a piece of my mind. But Brian came first. The medics were doing all they could, but they needed more equipment from the ambulance. One of them suggested we carry him through the snow, but it was too risky. The cold could finish what the illness started. I called 911 again. Begged them to send another unit, or at least a snowplow to clear the road. Every second that ticked by felt like a lifetime. Eventually, 2 officers knocked on the door. I recognized them. They'd worked local events in the past. They said they tried reasoning with Debbie, but she was digging in. Told them the HOA had authority over the roads, and she was in charge. The cops looked frustrated. Said some cell towers were out, and the city plows were behind schedule. They threatened to tow her SUV, but she claimed they didn't have permission from the HOA board. It was madness. Red tape over common sense. I asked the officers if they could help me carry Brian to the ambulance. They were hesitant. If we moved him too soon, we could make things worse. For now, he was barely stable, but that could change fast. I looked out the window at the dark snowstorm swallowing our street. No way Brian would survive a trip through that. I felt something shift inside me. I'd led soldiers in war zones. I wasn't afraid of confrontation. And I sure wasn't about to let someone like Debbie decide whether my son lived or died. I quietly asked one of the officers to come with me. We trudged back toward the ambulance. Debbie was still there, ranting about property values like that was the only thing that mattered. She barely looked at me. That's when I told her something I'd kept to myself. I was a major general, recently retired from the U.S. Army. She blinked, caught off guard. Then she actually laughed. Doesn't mean anything to the HOA, she said. I took a deep breath and told her straight, blocking emergency services is a crime. And I'd make damn sure she was held accountable. She just waved me off like I was nothing. But now, the officer had real grounds to escalate things. Blocking a directive from a retired general during an emergency? That could trigger federal involvement. He gave Debbie one last warning to move her vehicle, but she stood firm, arms crossed. That's when the second cop grabbed his radio and called in backup from City Rescue, mentioning a potential illegal obstruction. Meanwhile, every second counted. The paramedics were wasting time they didn't have. I turned to Debbie and said, "You seriously don't know who you're messing with. If my son dies because you blocked his access to medical care, I promise you, there will be charges. And I'll make sure you never get the chance to push another family around again." Still, she didn't budge. Her arrogance was unbelievable. She kept going on and on, how the road was paid for by HOA dues, how the ambulance tires might ruin the new pavement, how they'd spent thousands making sure snowplows followed exact property lines. All of that, while my son was fighting to stay alive. The snow was still falling, thick and fast. In the glow of those flashing red lights, the ice crystals looked like glass. I saw the paramedic still sitting in the ambulance, his face twisted in frustration. Then, more sirens. A big city police truck with chains on its tires came barreling through the snow. 2 more officers jumped out. One of them, clearly a higher-up, marched straight toward Debbie. He didn't ask, he demanded she move her SUV. Right now. She clutched her stack of papers and started repeating the same garbage about bylaws and property rights. But the lieutenant had no time for it. He radioed a tow truck without hesitation. That's when her expression finally changed. Her eyes got wide. She realized they weren't bluffing. That truck was about to haul her precious SUV out of there. She exploded, screaming insults, calling everyone incompetent, bragging about how much she'd done for the neighborhood. But finally, grudgingly, she got behind the wheel and moved her vehicle. The ambulance crept forward, slowly making its way through the snow. Wind whipped around it like a scene out of a movie. One of the paramedics thanked me quickly, but I was already sprinting back to the house. I had to know if Brian was still hanging on. Inside, I saw his lips, thankfully, They had a little color again. The medics were doing what they could with the basics they brought. But once their equipment rolled through the door, everything changed. They got him on warmed 4 fluids, started monitoring his vitals more closely. The relief in the room was real. I watched as the pink came back to his cheeks, slowly, and I realized we'd almost lost him. Over what? A road? A bylaw? Somebody's ego? But the next step wasn't any easier, getting Brian safely from the living room to the ambulance. The medics had a special stretcher, one designed to shield him from the cold, but we still had to make a path. One of the officers and I grabbed shovels and cleared a narrow walkway through the snow. Debbie stood nearby, still glaring, but now she kept her mouth shut. You could tell the threat of real charges had sunk in. As we carefully carried Brian through the path, I overheard her muttering, something about how the ambulance was an eyesore. That was it. That was the moment my patience ran out. I turned and told her, "You just made the worst mistake of your life." She scoffed and said my threats meant nothing. Claimed the HOA had big-shot lawyers backing everything she did. I didn't answer. I had more important things to focus on. The ambulance pulled away, inching down the now-cleared road. I jumped in my own truck, tires wrapped in chains, and followed close behind. No way was I going to let them take Brian without me. At the hospital, doctors confirmed it, early signs of hypothermia. They got him into a warming bed and kept him under 24/7 observation. He was stable, but they weren't taking chances. And neither was I. That night, sitting at his bedside, I was boiling inside. I kept thinking about the families I'd helped while I was overseas, the relief missions I'd coordinated in disaster zones. And now here I was, in America, watching a child nearly die because someone was obsessed with property lines. I knew one thing: this wasn't over. Debbie, whatever name she wanted to go by, she was going to learn that my rank wasn't just something stitched onto a uniform. It meant I knew how to fight back, with structure, with discipline, and with facts. After 2 days in the hospital, Brian was finally cleared to go home. He was stable, but he was shaken. You could see it in his eyes. He'd been scared, and the situation had been made so much worse by one person's refusal to act like a human being. Before we left, I started making calls. First, to a lawyer friend who specializes in ADA cases. Then, to an old buddy from my Army days who now works in local government. Within hours, I had a small but serious team pulling together a plan to investigate everything. Turns out, Debbie had done this kind of thing before. Just a month earlier, she threatened to fine another family because their kid's wheelchair ramp didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. Too wide. Not the right shade of beige. Seriously. That's when it hit me, this wasn't just a one-off. It was a pattern. She'd made life hell for anyone who didn't fit her narrow vision of normal. When we got back to the neighborhood, it was late afternoon. Snow was still piled high, but at least the road was passable. Word had already spread, new guy went head-to-head with the HOA president. Neighbors started showing up at my door. Quiet voices. Nervous glances. One by one, they shared their stories, little infractions, threats of eviction, bogus fines over things like a bird feeder or a garden gnome that was an inch too tall. She'd ruled over the place like a petty tyrant. Now, I may not have official authority anymore, but I've spent a lifetime understanding structure. I know how to organize, how to gather intel, how to build a case. So I listened. I took notes. And I asked them to send me anything they had, documents, pictures, emails, anything that showed a pattern of harassment. That night, my dining table turned into a full-blown command center. Papers everywhere. HOA bylaws, violation letters, neighbors' statements. I started piecing it together. Debbie had raised HOA dues without proper votes. She rewrote landscaping rules to benefit her own yard. She even installed security cameras pointed at other people's backyards, called it a safety measure. People were too afraid to push back. Until now. My next step? Call the press. I reached out to a local news station, gave them the story in a nutshell. A disabled child nearly froze because of an HOA president's power trip. Plus, possible ADA violations. They were very interested. The next morning, a reporter showed up outside my house. I stood by the driveway, microphone in my face, and told them everything, from the emergency call to Debbie's blockade. I didn't put Brian on camera, but I described what he went through, in clear, simple terms. My lawyer friend joined me to explain the legal side of it all. That evening, the story hit the news. And it blew up online. People were outraged. Hashtags started trending. There were calls for Debbie's removal and for the HOA to be investigated. Comment after comment poured in. Some angry, some heartbroken, but all demanding action. The pressure landed hard on the rest of the HOA board, most of whom had just gone along with her all this time. Debbie tried to play the victim. Said she was misunderstood. Claimed the storm made things chaotic and that she was only trying to protect the neighborhood. But that wave of public outrage? It wasn't slowing down. The police opened a deeper investigation into what happened that night. And yes, they found that she physically interfered with emergency services. That's a crime, plain and simple. My lawyer started drafting a lawsuit. We cited ADA violations, state emergency obstruction laws, the works. As more days passed, more neighbors began stepping forward with their own stories about Debbie. Some were seniors she'd harassed for not keeping their lawns perfectly trimmed. Others were families with special needs kids who'd faced similar treatment. It felt like a dam had broken. One story after another peeled back more layers of the power trip she'd been on for years. That weekend, the HOA board announced an emergency meeting. Word got around fast. And when the day came, the community center was packed. A lot of people had never even been to a meeting before. They'd always been too afraid of what Debbie might do. But now, folks were fired up and ready. I brought Brian with me. He was bundled up in warm clothes, sitting quietly in his chair, but determined to be there. Inside, the air was thick with tension. People lined the walls, whispering about what might happen next. At the head of the room sat Debbie, flanked by a few board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She tried to kick things off with a speech about decorum and proper procedure, but the second she claimed the whole incident was being exaggerated by the media, the room just lost it. That's when I stood up. I'd prepared a short, clear statement, just like I used to in the military. No fluff, just facts. I told them exactly what had happened the night Brian almost died. I explained how Debbie blocked the ambulance, how the paramedics struggled without access to their equipment, how dangerously cold my son had gotten, and how, as a retired Army Major General, I'd seen a lot of things, but never imagined a kid could be put in danger like this in an American suburb. The room went silent. People were visibly shaken. Then, one neighbor stepped up to the mic. She said Debbie had once threatened her with a $500 fine because her wheelchair ramp wasn't painted the same color as her house siding. Another guy shared that his dad's medical transport had been delayed for hours because Debbie demanded they get prior approval. Testimony after testimony came pouring out. Story after story of bullying, threats, and intimidation. When Debbie finally tried to defend herself, rambling about bylaws and doing what's best for the community, people weren't having it. Voices rose. Some demanded she resign on the spot. Others wanted the entire HOA board removed. The board huddled up in the corner for a few tense minutes. Then the vice president came to the mic. He said Debbie was being removed from her position immediately, pending a full investigation by local authorities. The room erupted, cheers mixed with the kind of anger that had been bottled up for way too long. Debbie gathered her papers, face beet red, muttering about how ungrateful everyone was. Then she stormed out, pushing past people who wouldn't even look at her. But that wasn't the end. The police and media started digging deeper. And what they found was even worse. There were accusations of embezzlement, sketchy bookkeeping, unauthorized fines, money that had gone straight into HOA coffers and, in some cases, Debbie's own pockets. Turns out she'd even paid off folks to stay quiet. When a local disability rights organization heard what had happened, they reached out. They thanked us for standing up and offered legal help. My attorney friend worked with them to file a broader lawsuit, not just for Brian, but for every family Debbie had bullied under the guise of neighborhood standards. It took weeks, depositions, paperwork, more investigation, but in the end, Debbie faced criminal charges. obstructing emergency services, violating federal disability laws, and misusing HOA funds. She tried to play dumb, said she didn't realize how serious it all was. But the dash cam footage from the ambulance showed her standing in front of it, blocking the path, clear as day. And then there was the financial audit. Thousands of dollars unaccounted for. Expenses that somehow led back to her personal credit cards. Her former supporters vanished. Not one of them stood by her. On the day of her arraignment, I sat in the courtroom with Brian beside me. He was still shaken from what he'd been through, but he wanted to be there when justice was served. The judge read out the charges: obstruction of emergency services, multiple disability rights violations, and suspected embezzlement. Debbie's lawyer tried to cut a plea deal, but the evidence was rock solid. She ended up pleading guilty, paid a heavy fine, and was ordered to pay restitution to every family she hurt. The judge also ordered her to issue a public apology. She gave one. Sort of. Cold, forced, and without eye contact. She never looked at me. Never acknowledged Brian. But it was done. After that, our HOA held a new election. This time, the people chosen actually cared. They tossed out the ridiculous rules. They rewrote the guidelines to protect, not punish, families with special needs. They created volunteer groups to check on elderly and disabled residents during storms. The entire tone of the neighborhood shifted. No more paranoia about flower pots or holiday lights. No more bullying. I was invited to speak at the first community meeting under the new board. I talked about how true strength doesn't come from fear. It comes from unity. From standing up for each other. Brian was there too, a little shy, but smiling as neighbors clapped for him. Some even thanked him for inspiring change. Life settled into something peaceful after that. I stayed in the same house, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. People waved, said hello. A few families built ramps just to show support. Kids played outside again, without being told off for walking on someone's grass. The neighborhood felt human. And during the next winter, our new community stepped up. We formed a snow shoveling rotation to keep paths clear for Brian's wheelchair. Neighbors brought soup or fresh-baked cookies whenever he wasn't feeling well. We had each other's backs, something I'd seen in battle zones, and now, finally, in suburbia. We even added a new clause to the HOA charter: bold, front and center, no vehicle may be blocked during a medical emergency. Period. It was a permanent reminder of what happened, and how close we came to losing my son. Sometimes, I wonder, if Debbie had just shown a little kindness that night, maybe all of this could have been avoided. But her obsession with control blinded her. And once people saw that clearly, her downfall was swift. The story spread. Local papers ran it. A few national outlets picked it up too. Headlines read, "Retired General exposes HOA abuse after disabled son nearly dies." People online debated the role of HOAs, but most agreed on one thing: basic decency should always outweigh rigid rules. Now that the dust has settled, I've found some peace. I focus on Brian's care, on his therapy, and making sure he's ready for whatever challenges lie ahead. But I'll never forget how close we came to disaster, and how this community, once silent, found its voice just in time. There's one thought that still sticks with me, a terrifying one, honestly, and it's what keeps me going. I almost lost my son that night. And I'll do whatever it takes to protect him. A few days after everything happened, Brian and I had a quiet talk. He looked at me and said something that stopped me in my tracks. Sometimes grown-ups can be mean, he told me, but if good people speak up, the bad stuff can stop. He said it so simply, but it hit me hard. That's exactly why I served. To protect people who need it. To stand up for what's right. As for Debbie, no one saw her around the neighborhood again. Under the weight of legal fees and a reputation in ruins, she sold her house. Word was she left the state to start over somewhere new. And I'll be honest, there was a small part of me that felt sorry for her. But that sympathy disappeared the moment I remembered Brian lying on the floor, lips pale, gasping for breath, while she stood in the street, blocking the ambulance, grinning like it was some kind of game. That memory wiped out any trace of pity. What I felt instead was quiet certainty. We stood up. We did what had to be done. And we won. Weeks passed. Snow melted, the roads thawed, and the first signs of spring started pushing through the ground. We hosted a neighborhood barbecue, our way of saying, we're moving forward. People brought hot dogs, played music, and kids ran around laughing in the sunshine. It felt like a totally different place. I watched Brian roll along the sidewalk in his chair, chasing a ball with some of the other kids. And my heart just swelled. I kept thinking back to that night, the night we almost lost him. The paramedics who got stuck in the snow that evening? They showed up too. We shared a few laughs, even joked about the crazy barricade lady. But they also told me how different everything felt now. The tension, the fear, it was gone. No more harsh rules. No more threats. Just people being people. A local reporter heard about the barbecue and came by with a camera crew. She wanted to do a follow-up. So, we stood in front of the grill while she asked how it felt to see the neighborhood come together. I told her the truth. Change doesn't happen overnight. But when good neighbors stand up for each other, that's when things start to shift. Brian gave her a little wave and a shy smile. And just like that, the news captured a moment of real hope. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from the city council, recognizing our efforts to raise awareness about the importance of emergency access in HOA communities. Inside was a small plaque. I hung it near the family photos in the living room. It wasn't about the award, though. For me, it was a reminder that life is fragile and doing the right thing matters. Even when the fight seems small or the rules feel petty. Sometimes, late at night, I still think back to that storm. The howling wind. The ambulance stuck in the street. Debbie screaming about pavement while my son lay inside, fading. It feels like a nightmare that never fully lets go. But the outcome? That's something I'll hold on to forever. We changed this neighborhood. We replaced fear with friendship. We turned a near tragedy into a real turning point. A lesson in what it means to care about each other. I'll never forget that winter. The danger, yes, but also the triumph. The strength that came out of it. Even now, if I hear a siren at night, it takes me right back. But instead of panic, I lift my head. I know we're ready now. I know we've got good people on our side. Because no matter how power-hungry one HOA president might be, she's no match for a group of neighbors standing together. If you're hearing this and you're facing something similar, don't stay quiet. You're not alone. There are laws. There are rights. And there are people out there, just like you, who are willing to stand up and say, enough. I want to thank every single person who supported us during those dark days. From the kind folks who called and shared their own stories, to the police and paramedics who showed up when it mattered, to my friends who helped us navigate the legal mess. But most of all, I want to thank Brian. He's the reason I kept going. His strength, even through all the pain, showed me what resilience really looks like. He still faces challenges. The winters are rough. But because of him, we built a support system. Neighbors rotate snow shoveling. They check in with soup or cookies when he's under the weather. And now, it's official, no emergency vehicle will ever be blocked again. That rule is carved into our new HOA charter, in bold print. A permanent reminder of what happened. And what should never happen again. Sometimes, I wonder how different things would have been if Debbie had just shown 1 ounce of kindness. But her pride, her obsession with rules, it blinded her. In the end, once folks stood up, she fell fast. The story made the rounds. Local news, national coverage, even social media. People debated it all. Some defended HOA rules, others slammed them. But most people agreed, humanity has to come first. After the legal battles faded, I finally felt peace. I could focus again on Brian's therapy, on helping him prepare for the next season. And sometimes, I still sit and reflect on how close we came to losing him. Just a few more minutes, and he might not have made it. But we got through it. Together. If you've stuck with me this long, thank you. If you've ever seen an HOA take things too far, tell your story. If you've faced injustice, don't be afraid to fight it. We owe it to each other to speak up, to be kind, and to never let fear keep us quiet. Brian survived that night. And because we stood as one, our community came out stronger. So, if you're listening to this, Debbie, I've got nothing else to say. Except, you picked the wrong dad. You picked the wrong soldier. And you'll never do this to another family again. Today, when I see my son smiling, rolling down a snow-cleared sidewalk, surrounded by neighbors who finally get it, I know this is what real victory looks like. Rules should protect us. Never hurt the ones who need help the most. That's the legacy of that brutal night. One frozen ambulance. One nearly lost child. And a community that rose together. Thank you for listening. Stay safe. Stand tall. And never let anyone silence your voice.